Hi, this is Murray Coleman, broker with Keller Williams in Florida. Today we're going to look at offer and acceptance, paragraph 3 of the contract, and to discuss when a contract is effective. In real estate contract negotiations, the statutes of frauds requires a contract for the purchase of real estate to be in writing for it to be valid. An offer is made in writing by a buyer to a seller who can accept, reject, or counter the offer. A counteroffer is actually another term for rejection, but it is a hopeful rejection as it gives the opportunity for the buyer to respond to the seller. In a real estate transaction, we need to know when we have an accepted contract, as this will define the effective date of the contract, subject to the delivery, which we'll discuss below. It's often a sorry tale when agents are going backwards and forwards with verbal negotiations, and finally the seller's agent says, "We have a deal. The seller will accept $459,000. The buyer's agent pops the champagne with the buyer and tells them that they have a deal. However, prior to the paperwork being completed, the seller's agent calls back and states that the seller has now rejected the offer and is going to go with a higher cash one. This creates a horrible conversation to be had with the buyer. The deal is not set in stone until the agreement is signed and committed to writing. Just hold the celebrations until the ink is on the page and the page has been delivered." Looking at paragraph 3, the FAR 6 and the as is defines a process in paragraph 3. The process is the time for acceptance of offer and counteroffers and the effective date. And it says, if not signed by the buyer and seller and an executed copy delivered to all parties on or before a certain date, which the buyer would insert into the contract at the time of offer, then this offer shall be deemed withdrawn and the deposit, if any, shall be returned to the buyer. Unless otherwise stated, time for acceptance of any counter offers shall be within 2 days after the day the counter offer is delivered. So here's some examples and practice tips. If a buyer submits an offer to the seller, let's say on September the 1st, 2020, and puts September the 2nd in the blank line as the deadline for seller acceptance, the seller can accept the terms or counter. The seller needs to do this, though, prior to midnight on the 2nd. If they don't respond, it means the offer is withdrawn by the buyer. They missed an opportunity. The buyer now may be putting offers on other properties. If the seller wants the buyer to buy, they would actually need to change and initial the date of acceptance and deliver it back to the buyer. The buyer will need to initial the change and deliver it back to the seller for it to be an effective contract. Of course, the buyer can always reject the seller's counter offer. Buyer's agents sometimes put a short window for acceptance, hoping this will make the seller respond quickly. However, this practice may cause confusion when a seller is expecting multiple offers and adds another layer of process, which I just described a few seconds ago. If you are a seller's agent, you may consider asking the seller if they want to respond to all offers by a certain date, and then place a warning into the MLS which says something like, the seller will respond to all offers on certain date. And a buyer's agent should consider explaining to a buyer that they should put a date beyond the cutoff to avoid the need to change the time to respond. This will avoid an extra step of changing the date. The effective date of the contract shall be the date when the last one of the buyer and seller has signed or initialed and delivered this offer or final counter offer. It's also important to understand the provision and uses of riders and addenda. The addenda section of the contract in paragraph 19 states, The following additional terms are included in the attached addenda or riders and incorporated into the contract. So if the box is checked in paragraph 19, then the addendum is part of the contract, and the contract will be effective when the checked rider, which is made part of the contract, is signed and delivered. An agent should make sure all the parties know when the effective date is, and if there is any confusion on calculating time periods, obtain consensus between the buyer and seller. The effective date may actually be declared and agreed upon in an addendum to the contract if there is confusion. So therefore, the effective date is day 0 in the calculations of all time periods. For example, if the offer is accepted on a Saturday and the seller signs the offer and the associated riders at 11 p.m. and then delivers to the buyer, Sunday will then be day 1. Monday is day 2, etc. If the buyer's agent does not check for the accepted contract until Monday, one of the effective days has already passed. It is important to understand the calculation of time in a contract, and that is the most asked question in a broker's world. If you want to read more about this subject, you can read on floridarealtors.org. There is an article that covers most of the topics that I've spoken of in this video. I will publish the link in the associated handout for this presentation. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please email murraycoleman@kw.com.